Live, live, live. What up, what up? Waiting for Jon to hit me up. I'll get this thing started. You guys can hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, what's up, Evan? Just Chubbs. Alice Glass fan. What's up, Molly? Let's see. Hola, ¿qué pasó, Sophie? What's good? Thank you, Evan. Thank you. Migui. All right, let's see. Waiting for Jon. Where's Jon at? Yeah, I think we're just going to kind of chat. Jon and I end up having these really long conversations whenever we hang out, and about life, about philosophy, about thinking about how to make records, and everything in between. Yeah, there's all these technical questions I always want to ask him, and I forget to, and we figured we would do it over live. Let's see if he'll show up at some point. Oh, there's Jon. What's up, Jon? There's that request. Join now. Hey.
What's up?
What's up, buddy? How are you? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
How you doing this morning?
You think two audio engineers will have a hard time with the sound on Instagram?
I mean, if we were social media influencers, I would be sure that we would get it right. But this is the first time I've gone live with someone. I've gone live a couple of times before, just making shit and screwing around. But have you ever gone live before at all?
I've never done either.
This is a banner day.
I feel really good about it, though. It's really
pumped. I do too, man. I do too. Well, I was just talking for a second before you joined on about us. Maybe we could just start off like you and I met maybe a year or so ago. Maybe longer.
Maybe a little longer.
2 years. I don't know. 10 years ago. It feels like it's been a decade. Met through an event that you put on, or an evening you put on for pretty much. I think it was Tom Overbury at Psycho in the UK that helped get us together, and you and I immediately nerded out about tubes, which is as nerdy engineers do.
Yes.
But subsequent to that, you and I started hanging out a bit more and found common interest in a lot of things, including realizing that we were both interested in this idea of building communities. You with your conversations at the gift shop, your place there, your amazing loft studio space, where you've been doing very specific engineer related things, although with an eye to expanding it. And I've done little bits of things at a email blast I put out periodically for a while, and doing these Sunday brunches, which you came to. And I realized, of course, that aside from our initial conversations about tubes when we first met and nerded out, we actually don't talk about engineering and mixing and record making all that much. I think part of that is because you and I both been doing it for so long that we've started to, I think of record making as a career in sort of arcs. Like the first part is just the obsessive phase where you're not thinking, you're just doing, you're just making, you're just trying all kinds of shit. And then you start to transition into, how do I refine this? How do I build good habits? And I know that's something that you and I talk a lot about. I know we were talking about meditation yesterday. You did I did my 10 minutes this morning. I'm going to do my hour later today.
Oh, you didn't do it?
I didn't have time, man. I woke up too late.
I did the initial 10 normal, and then I went food shopping, and then I did an hour.
Damn, dude. So you just came off an hour, so you're super zen right now.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of difficult. Let's be real. I mean, sitting there for an hour, I extended it to a walking meditation, so I stood up out of the chair and I walked really slowly. I got a glass of water. I moved to a different seat. And then all of a sudden, after 10 minutes in a new seat, I felt like I began to float for a minute, which was really, really nice. But then it's like when you're we could talk about this later, but when you're getting into a flow state creatively, once you're aware that you're in the flow state, you're not in the flow state anymore. So I was aware of floating and I stopped floating. It's really, really annoying because it was such a beautiful feeling. And you don't get that from 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You get the calm from 10 minutes, but
totally agree. It's a bit like if you don't know how to lucid dream, which I don't know how, once you realize you're in the dream, you pop out of it. It feels like a similar vibe. Well, I know that you and I can talk about all kinds of stuff as we always do, but maybe we chat about actual mixing and technical things. I got a whole bunch of questions, some of which I sent you.
Damn, do we have to?
we don't have to, but
No,
I feel like if what we're doing here is trying to transfer some of the conversations we have in small groups in private and put it on the internet, I think obviously people give us feedback about what you like and don't like about this process. This is maybe something we'll do a lot. Maybe something we'll do in different forms, but figure we just talk in public and see what people think and answer some questions. One of the questions I got a few different versions of was kind of that basic thing of, I'm starting out mixing. I want to learn about mixing. How do I learn about it? How do I do it? How do I get better at it? And I know you and I have lots of thoughts about this, but probably we'll answer it in one of those larger philosophical ways. But what do you think about that generally? How do you think about mixing as something connected to and distinct from production, writing, engineering as tracking? Mixing has evolved so much in the last, you've been a mixer, 15 years now?
Yeah. 15
and even in those 15 years, the idea of people that mix in the box, wasn't a thing at the very beginning of when we were starting. How do you think about mixing, people who are interested in mixing as it relates to production and other things?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing, to learn how to mix, I feel like one has to find a mentor. And I don't think it has to be a one-on-one personal mentorship where you're in the room day in, day out. That's my experience, and we can go into that for sure, because I think it's helpful to hear some stories in real life. But I interviewed my mentor, Tony Maserati, recently after one of the conversation nights. And when I asked him who his mentor was, he had a really interesting response, which, when the conversation comes out, everyone will get to hear a little bit more in depth. But he didn't have a specific mentor. He said he had many mentors, and they were unknowingly his mentor. Meaning he would be a fly on the wall in a studio and he would learn from them. He would research, he would read. We have so many outlets to finding information on techniques and approaches that people go on about at this point. I would say there's a lot more bad than good out there, as there is any bit of information on the internet. So I'm actually working on I'm working on a platform where hopefully we can distill some information down and kind of pop it out the other end. But mentorship in general seems to be the way, finding, the people that you look up to when you look at their credits and you hear the consistent thread through their work. So, I mean, it's a lot of listening.
It's interesting. You and I both had, do you think of Tony as obviously as your mentor? You worked under him for a long time. Did you work for other mixers, other producers, engineers, and it was just him?
It was just him. I mean, I wouldn't even say, and I think he would agree, I don't even say that I worked for Tony. I think I worked with Tony. I think it was mostly collaborative, which he's so good at. I think that in general, that's how you become your own version of what you want to be. And I think there's other ways to do it. That was our way. I did have a very short-term studio position where I kind of understand where Tony was coming from with his impersonal mentorships, where I was the assistant at a studio for a very brief time, intern/assistant in a studio on Long Island, where I never got asked to clean the bathrooms, which is kind of amazing. I was always told to go in the room. I don't know, the owner, we were both saxophone players. He was one of Billy Joel's saxophone players back in the day. A legend. And I think because we were both horn players, he took a liking to me really fast. So he was like, go in the room. So I would never ask any questions. I'm pretty shy in general, so I didn't really know when to assert in the room when I was 17, 18 years old. So I kind of just sat back. But I remember watching these engineers. Everyone had a different approach. There was a guy in there mixing Dream Theater one day, and his faders were really hot on the board. And then there was someone else mixing like a folk record. I forgot exactly who it was at the time, but his faders were really low. And he kind of turned around at one point and told me that, he was overdriving. One of them was overdriving the inputs of the console, so the faders had to be low. Just these basic techniques. And, the opposite would be that your input signal is really low, so the faders have to be hot to hit tape right. And, different approaches, not one better than the other. So I was a fly on the wall for that. But Tony and the studying with him, man, that's a different story, because it's mostly about how to be professional.
Interesting. It's interesting to think about the duality of both going very deep in one particular thing and at the same time being aware of lots of different approaches. Because it seems to me that, I also worked under with a great engineer producer, Eric Valentine, who I think he's an amazing, producer, songwriter, musician, he's an incredible drummer. I think at heart, he's a scientist and therefore a super engineer. And obviously all the undertone audio stuff is such incredible gear. You and I both have a lot of it. Yeah. And so, but I also benefited from, having a very specific mentor and working with someone very closely, learning a very specific approach. But at the same time, I worked for a number of other producers, working with Flood on a 30 Seconds to Mars record, working for Jakir King on some things, Dennis Herring, a few other producers, and vastly different approaches. It's interesting you talk about professionalism. I actually think that's probably the thing that long-term mentorship teaches you more than anything else, because in the end, you really do have to find your own approach to things. But watching someone work and being around someone and just being that fly on the wall or actively participating, both are valuable, and they intertwine. To find someone who you can learn how to be a professional from, learn how to have patience and poise, and how to be hard on yourself when you need to and not hard on yourself at other times. I feel like that's an undervalued skill these days too, because the systems of studios and mentorships don't seem to exist quite as much.
Reliability. Someone that can be relied upon across the board. For example, just in real life, yesterday, I'm on, I think, maybe improv 5 or 6 on a mix with an artist, new artist developing. She's so great, so excited about this project. And, I think she approved a mix at one point. And then she came back yesterday and said, hey, there was something magical about the vocal on mix 3. I'd love to go back to that. I was able to get back to that in 15 seconds, and the mix was sent back to her in 6 minutes. I mean, that's something.
I'm hiring you again. Yeah.
But that's exactly. And but that's pure Tony. That's pure. Hey, if someone wants to get back to the version 2 bass, you should be able to get back there in less than a minute. I mean, how's your archival? How's your backup? How's all of this stuff? It seems to be a combination of both organization, which is extremely important, especially for mixers. I mean, if you're a wild creative and you're just like, making crazy beats or throwing paint on a canvas or whatever, you have more leeway to be eccentric. But do you? But yes, you do. But when 5 years, I mean, I just had a song come out, as you know, from 4 years ago that I co-produced. I mean, those stems existed, and when they were asked for them from me, I gave them to them clean, right? So it was really easy. I don't really fully agree. I think that that's a very good point. Eccentric writer producer type, have an engineer that has that brain.
That may be the answer to that the eccentric, all over the place, disorganized people are not going to be successful without either learning organization or having someone in their life that takes care of that role. And the other side of it, as you were talking about that, there is the role of ego in all of it. How much. Yeah, you are in this place now where you are just crushing it as a mixer. You've been very consistent. I could compliment you endlessly to your face and make you uncomfortable if you would like. You probably wouldn't like it all. But you've been doing a particular thing for a while now, and my career has been a combination of a lot of different things as a writer, as a producer, as an executive producer. Sometimes I'm mixing my stuff. Sometimes I'm mixing other people's stuff. What I realized that one of the things that's been toughest for me, which I've gotten a lot better at in the last, 5 or 6 years, is the emotional attachment to things that I'm working on. And being like, not even like the way I did it is great, but if I do something and somebody approves of a mix, and then we do 6 more, and then they want to go back to version 2, it doesn't bother me anymore, but it used to bother me a lot. It used to, I wouldn't resist it. They're hiring me, but I could tell that was a frustrating thing for me.
But why would you resist going back to an initial intent that you had, right? So your version 2 is most likely a better mix to your initial instinct towards the mix. So the resentment of going backwards seems counterintuitive to me, at least.
By the way, totally counterintuitive. Absolutely. Which is, something I feel a lot more now. I think part of it is just the frustration with having to deal with other people's timelines and frustrations and uncertainties and that sort of thing. I think what I'm getting at is I realize that the people that are the most successful and have the longest career doing any of this stuff are the people that really are easy to deal with and are consistent and just want to help their collaborators, the people hiring their clients, their friends, get the best thing. And above all else.
That's all I want.
Yeah. And by the way, it's always the best result.
Yeah, the least friction possible in order to get the piece of art across the line, really.
As a mixer, as a producer, if you're coming in toward the end of a process, you always have to remember too that everybody else in the process has very likely been extremely stressed on and off for a very long time. So not only is it good just generally to be super flexible and be super easy and be reliable, but you're also providing sort of the icing on the cake or the finishing touches of the whole process. Of a much longer process that you haven't been a part of. And so you being that easy neutral party tends to help a lot. Are there any sort of specific things in terms of actually the technical mixing process that have, I tend to think of you as trying to use the minimal effective dose of everything. When I was coming up, working with Eric, everything was really recording acoustic instruments, not a lot of samples, not a lot of, just straight up computer-based stuff. And so the mixing process tended to be much more involved in terms of, we're going to try to hit tape. We're going to try to get different saturation. We're going to try to mult out things and tweak this so we can make it sound really exciting. Like, how do you make a SM57 on a snare drum sound as exciting as a hip hop record in the year 2000? And the answer is, you might have to mult it and run this thing through a distortion and this thing through a distressor and then parallel drum compression and lots of layers of that sort of stuff. How has that sort of stuff changed with the way people make records now? What's the feeling of a lot of the tracks, the raw tracks you're getting, and how do those feel different, and how do you approach that?
It's interesting. You kind of just hit the word raw. I don't know the last time I got raw tracks. So when I asked for when I've gotten raw tracks, I question why I'm getting them. And usually it's a mistake. You say, engineer or producer sent the wrong folder. We're getting... When you say raw tracks, you mean everything from vocals to drum stems to whatever. Yeah, everything. I mean, I would like a raw vocal as a reference point to have kind of just in case there's something about the processed version, whether it's overcompressed or there's distortion. Well, where's the distortion coming from? Was it actually inherent in the recorded signal, or is it baked in, or can I get rid of it? Because we don't want to, I don't think we want a distorted vocal most of the time, specifically in pop music. You
don't want mistake distortion.
Yeah, we don't want mistake distortion. I'm not a big fan of digital clipping plugin distortion. I'm not sure who is, unless you're using a decimort or something that's intentionally bit reducing and going for that. But hearing a Waves plugin distort, I'm not really sure anything about that is ideal or yeah, I mean, I could talk about that for way too long.
Yeah, well,
but
maybe
what I'm noticing is the sound. So I'm much better at using examples. So I just mixed a song for my friend Keto. She's an amazing producer.
Oh, she's great.
And she had a amazing snare drum, like one of my favorite snare drums I've heard in a while. It was kind of like futuristic Timberland. It was so woody and thick, and it felt organic, but it was obviously a sample and one shot. And it was the same every time, you know, but it was heavy. But I kind of wanted to reshape it and go even further. So I remember doing a ridiculous boost somewhere, you know, somewhere in the mid-range. And I kind of emphasized the length of that snare, like emphasized the full texture of what that sound choice was. So in a sense, you're elevating, and what I'm usually going for is elevation of the initial sound choice and the intention of the producer or the artist or whoever's doing it. I don't know that I'm trying to manipulate it so far that it's completely different. I don't think I would ever really do that. You know, if someone said, I don't like this sound, but there's a vibe to it, maybe that's an experimental chance to go deeper and change it. But it's mostly elevation of an intent. And I think as mixers and as we get further along in our career path and our journey through music in general, we understand more reference points. So hearing that snare drum made me think of early 2000s Timberland, but it wasn't a fully realized version of that. But the minute I sent the mix back and then voiced that to her, she's like, yeah, that's exactly what I was going for. And man, you really like pushed it to that next level. And, you know, you have those dialogues together, and I think that's my job, is to understand where someone was attempting to go with it. And if it's fully realized already, get out of the way and let it be, work on the vocal, get that vocal to pop through. I mean, every song is different, right? So I don't know about raw files. I don't want them.
I'm going to make you mix something with like 16 drum mics.
Yeah, well, I want them if it was recorded and it was never mixed, right? So if there was no rough mix, there was no day of board mix, or maybe it was just the day of quick board mix, and there was no intentional mixing from either someone's engineer or the producer who's also an engineer like yourself. If there's no intended rough mix, then sure, let's go raw and let's collaborate and let's see. That's just so rare with the size of the teams that are in part on most of the projects that I work on. You know, from manager, A&R, brother, sister, mom, dad, best friend, everybody that's listened to this rough mix, like, is so in love with it. My job is to understand what about it is lovable and what is not.
It's funny to hear. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. How many people are attached to an existing mix? Because the amount of times I've gotten songs where people go, "This isn't mixed yet," and I listen to it, I'm like, sounds like a mixed, like, you know, what does it mean to not be mixed now? What it is someone like you hasn't gotten a hold of it and put it to a place that's really like at as good as it can be. But everybody on some level is a mixer. You sort of have to be a mixer as you're producing these days. You're not thinking, it's not like Quincy Jones, you're thinking about arrangements and you're writing things and then you go capture it. It's like you're actively creating, you're actively thinking about, does this snare drum slap as you're putting it over chords, as a songwriter, as someone on the couch is like, oh, I fuck with that. And then all of a sudden you have an identity that, 20 years ago you'd kind of wait until it was mixed, or, that sort of thing. How do you think about, one of the questions I got a couple of versions of was about references, both as mixing, as songwriting. Do you, when you talk about either literal references of playing things back, or, talking about when you hear something, you go, oh, that reminds me of something from 15 years ago. Are you doing much literal A-Bing other than maybe with the rough mix, or are you just kind of going on your instinct at this point?
Rough mix and instinct. For me, the rough mix is a huge part of it. So I have a Grace monitor controller that has multiple AES inputs. So I have a button that I can select that is piggybacked AES 1 and 2. So I can flip from my mix to the rough mix in an instant. So I can hear what I'm improving. I rely on that more so for extremely dense pop records that already sound like they've been mixed. And I can also argue against your saying that everybody is a mixer or can be a mixer at this point. I would potentially argue that one is considered a mixer if they have from start to finish seen the completion of at least one released album. At least one, I would say. I mean, to be a voting member of the Grammys, I think it's like 5 credits or something, 5 albums that are commercially released. They don't have to be commercial and to the standards of that, but you should have on your back been relied upon to deliver final released versions of said records to be considered a mixer.
Well, it's an interesting way to think about it, because I think I was more saying that in order to create these days, you have to be thinking about sonics. And so maybe what you're saying is that the role of a mixer is no longer like the sonics guy. It's really more of the person who understands what it is to finish a record, what it takes, what it means.
To translate on multiple platforms simultaneously, stand the test of time.
Maybe this can transition into the by the way, and when I'm producing, mixing, whatever, I love referencing stuff. Definitely when I'm producing something, I'm referencing a demo production, I'm mixing, referencing the demo mix. I try not to reference too many other records, but also I don't just straightforwardly mix as consistently as you do. So I'm guessing that when you sit down, you know exactly what everything sounds like perfectly. And I'm moving studios every 2 years trying to get a new creative vibe so my beats sound exciting. One of the reasons that you and I decided to do this is because, like we said earlier, that we don't actually have a lot of engineering mixing discussions very much. We end up talking about philosophy and politics and art and food, which maybe the next one will just be exclusively about food.
Anytime.
But one of the things that I know a little bit about, and talking to other people, I feel like I know nothing about it comparatively, but I don't think anybody really has a good handle on it, except maybe for you, which is this idea of how mixes translate. Because the era that when you and I were growing up, it was CDs, and that has a very specific digital limit to the sound, and that's the era of the quote unquote loudness wars, where people were mastering stuff as loud as possible. So when you skip past to the next track on a CD, the one song would be louder than the previous, and it got to the point where you had these extremely loud, mastered, distorted, clipping, crazy records, some of which were very exciting. When you look at records that like Sonny Skrillex did, and those are some of the most exciting sounding records possible.
Bangarang's crazy,
Bangarang is crazy. That purple Lamborghini song with Rick Ross, I think is the Suicide Squad soundtrack. That's like that thing comes in LUFS like -2.5. Like it's the most absurd. It's insane sounding. But of course, most music isn't meant to be just destroyed through your brain and hammered into you. You and I have talked a little bit about streaming services, different formats. I don't know. Do you want to give me an overall what you think about it? I can ask you some specific questions as well. But how do you think about all that?
Jump in with any specifics, but I'm still kind of figuring it out and formulating it in my head too. And I had a good discussion last night with a mastering friend of mine, Rory, who's also part of my Conversations crew, and we're not even sure Spotify is going to be around in 5 to 8 years, right? So
adapting quickly to everything.
Yeah,
and they might change their algorithms too. Who knows?
Yeah, well, they are, and they're discussing it. So I actually did last night before our conversation kind of go online and see what they're saying and where they're at. And they use an algorithm. What was it called again? I think I wrote it down over here. Rory would know off the top of his head. Oh yeah, replay gain. It's not LUFS. So what they're doing is matching the equivalent of -14 LUFS, right? So to engineers talking numbers, that's about where they're normalizing all records to at that point. But that's
it's equivalent to LUFS?
Equivalent to -14. So it's whatever replay gain says, and then they lower it an extra 3. So maybe replay game normalizes at -11, and then they're going an extra 3, is what they're saying.
So replay gain is their own system of measurement?
No, you can Google replay gain, and it is a standardized loudness.
I'm so glad this is recording. I'm going to Google all this shit after.
Dude, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then they have a really shitty data compression software that it's even worse at lower bit depths. It's Spotify is kind of the worst sounding platform and seemingly the most used, I think, at this point. But at the same time, at this moment, it is what I'm thinking of most when I'm mixing, because that's where most people listen to it. I think they're still above Apple Music at this point. I think it's neck and neck, and at some point that might transfer over. Maybe Amazon will buy Spotify at some point. Amazon, it actually sounds pretty great. Their streaming service. Tidal is the best, but no one knows about Tidal, which is a shame. But Tidal to me sounds better than CDs. It sounds equivalent to my QuickTime version of the Wave that I get back from the mastering engineer. It's somewhat sometimes better, but that could just be magic release syndrome. Like, oh, it's out there, so it sounds better.
Magic release syndrome. You have to coin that.
Magic.
Mine is always the opposite. I hear something that comes out and I'm like, I should have turned that.
No, that's the emotional connection to music. Once it's out, I either don't want to listen to it or I hear it in a completely different light, and it's usually with more enthusiasm. I'm actually not. I don't really relate to that one because I love when things come out. I think that's what we do this for. I think I have an artist mentality to a degree, but I chose to double down on engineering in the last few years specifically because I love releases and not being so precious over things. So I think I just kind of fit on just that side of the creative brain enough to just want to get it out there.
And I want to ask you about artist mentality, but keep going on this. We'll put a pin in that one.
So LUFS is important to a degree. We're mixing for the future. We're not mixing for today. We're mixing for both, theoretically. So I think if you look at the majority of the top 100, if you study that, it looks like things are coming in at minus 8.5 to minus 9 LUFS. And it's pretty loud. I'm hitting...
You're measuring that off of what? When it's... Because Spotify is adjusting when you're listening back. You're talking about...
If you go to iTunes and you turn off their normalization, it'll actually give you a reading.
Okay.
So a good example of one of the better sounding pop records is God's Plan, Drake. I mean, that was number one for a long amount of time. It's you can argue it's one of the more successful records of our time.
The low end is so wide and beautiful on that.
It's so wide and beautiful, right?
Yeah,
so the reason I'm bringing that up, that's a minus 12. That seems pretty optimal. That would mean you're turning it down 2 dB when by Spotify's algorithm is turning it down 2 dB. So there's headroom for it to be turned down. It's not turned down as much. There's transients left because that means you're not limiting or compressing as much to get it louder. But the real question and the real focus of all this to me is density. And it's arrangement density and sound and sonic density. So it could be, I think it originates in the production and the writing, but it can be kind of formed or reformed with proper gain structure in a mix stage. With a technical brain, I think it's a little bit of both. Density is the key. You have to make something feel as though it is loud and it not be loud for it to work on Spotify and Apple Music with normalization turned on. So you have to fake density and you have to maintain a certain amount of transients. So by the time it gets turned down by an algorithm you have no say in, you have no idea what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
If you look it up, it's actually this K-weighted graph that does, I think it's a really slow, smooth slope. That's probably 6 dB per octave, around 100 hertz down. And then from 800 hertz up is a 2 dB shelf. And that's how it reads the algorithm to decide if it should be less lowered or raised on maybe on an unmastered track. So maybe if you had a minus 16 track that was delivered, it would actually sound louder than, it's...
So it seems like you have more room in the low end, basically.
Well, you have more room in general. More headroom in general would allow longer cycle waves like 30 to 60 hertz low end to come through, which is why God Plan has so much low end. My mix with Dennis Koziak on Khalid's Talk has so much low end. That's a minus 12. We delivered that whole album, I think, between minus 12 and minus 10. So that has so much low end. It was on the radio. It was a top 5 hit. Like, there's no reason why you can't. Like, this is proof that you can send a lower mix, right? As an engineer, we're supposed to know the limits of technology. We're supposed to know how it's going to translate now. So I think you can argue that you can deliver a minus 8.5 master now, but also maybe maintain a less limited version for the long run. If you want to print two mixes, I used to print two mixes, a limited mix and an unlimited mix, one for the clients to listen to and then one to go to mastering. That would have more headroom for the mastering engineer. At this point, I'm kind of done on that mentality. I have one mix. The decisions are made with a limiter on it. Therefore, it is the mix.
Yeah.
To take off the limiter would get rid of so much of the glue of the mix. So it's also I think I was asked once in the past 2 years if I can have a mix if the client can have a mix without a limiter for their mastering guy. And when I asked who the mastering guy is, like, I never heard of this person. So it's kind of like, no, that's not a thing anymore. As long as there's headroom, right? So now there's average LUFS, program loudness, and then there's max LUFS, right? So I might say that I'm delivering a minus 10 mix, but maybe my max is a minus 8. So maybe by the last chorus, we're densely packed at minus 8. But most likely that feels good. You're at the last chorus, more layers are coming in from the producer. Maybe there's an ad lib that's kind of peaking, but it feels good to be a little loud, pan to the right. You know, there's a lot of variables going on there. So, I mean, this is all preference, right? So
it's very interesting, man. And it's so great that we're recording this, because I'm going to go back and and scrutinize. I'm going to take notes on my own conversation with you. It's great. When you talk about density in a mix, that's a really interesting concept. Are you, density seems like more than anything a feeling, as you're talking about. You want something to feel a certain way without actually increasing particular metrics like loudness or like LUFS or decibels. How do you go about achieving that, or is it just like you're finding voicings for different parts and adjusting EQ? Are you doing it with compression? I know you have interesting views on compression. Talk to me a little bit.
My view on compression is that I don't use it.
It's crazy. I love that. All I learned how to do was compress making records growing up, and you're just like, I don't believe in it. I don't. It's not that I don't believe in it. I believe that it serves a purpose that we don't
have to rely upon as much anymore. I would challenge everyone to attempt a mix without any compression and see what happens. Interesting. Okay, so then the question. So, but thinking about what does a compressor do, right? It levels out. Makes it sound sick. But good. No, yes, but why, right? So think about an 1176. What do we like about an 1176? We like the way it distorts. Okay, cool. There are better distortion and saturation tools now than the 1176. So we can saturate and get that quality, that characteristic one loves about the 1176 with another tool while maintaining transients, right? So what a lot of people don't know about compressors is even on the slowest attack setting, once you go over a 1-to-1 ratio, once you're at 1.1-to-1 ratio, you're now compressing and it's engaged. You're getting rid of 1/3 of your attack. A whole third of the transient is gone when it's at the slowest attack position. So the minute you are compressing, you are getting rid of your transients. Now, we do have ways to remake transients with transient shapers, the OG SPL transient designer, RIP. There's better ones now for y'all still using the UAD one. There are ways, but my argument is that transients and saturation are the future to mixing music rather than compression and EQ. Well, in a certain technical definition, distortion saturation does compress by definition. Yes. So you're talking about compressors as a device with a ratio being things that you don't like, but of course you are compressing things by using tubes, so what give me the rundown. What are the main, you have plugins. Obviously we've got a bunch of questions about what's your favorite plugin and what's your, which I know on some level kind of annoys, because it turns out it's well, whatever. I'll tell everyone what my not favorite plugin is. Anything Waves makes.
Remember, he's a mixer, though. He's a mixer. They're very wonderful, creative tools.
The uninstall icon is my favorite Waves plugin.
Damn, that's cold right there. There goes your Waves endorsement, bro.
It's okay. They can give it to someone else.
Hey, that's all good. So you basically have an arsenal or some small group of you obviously have some transient shaping things. You have go-to distortion that is both hardware and software.
Yeah, mostly hardware.
Mostly hardware, and it's mostly just tubes. Do you run any tape stuff or
only tube?
Only
tube. I think so many people have tried or are going tape route, and there's not a lot of people going the tube route. So I'm gonna double down on the tube route. Even order harmonic tubes, things that actually boost the fundamentals, not odd order harmonic distortion, not like a guitar amp. Very fundamental.
Is that even order? I'm not a even order is fundamental. Odd order or third order, is that the same thing? Okay, I remember some terminology. Yeah,
so things that are emphasizing the fundamental harmonics in a given signal.
Okay, and now what about got a lot of questions for people kind of starting out doing things where they I'm sure cannot afford a good tube box. Do you have recommendations for either if you have a little bit of money and you want a good vocal chain with a tube thing in it or something to mix through, is there a good hardware tube thing that you like or software substitutions that you like?
Yeah, I say stick to software until you save your money. I think bad hardware can do more harm than a mediocre plugin can.
You can't take it off if you
can't take it off. Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think that the effect that you might have from thinking you're improving the sound by using bad hardware, will complicate things for you, and you'll get an attachment and romanticize the fact that you have this.
It's a tube chain,
for example.
Right.
I think I always hear this word transparent used next to CL1B, and I've never heard a CL1B sound transparent to me.
To me, it's not that's the point of it, is to not be transparent.
Yeah, and I keep hearing these words in interviews from people of note, and I'm like, but it's not transparent. In fact, I think it's cloudy.
Yeah.
I think that it's not. But I don't want to necessarily bash pieces of gear. At least not in this first conversation.
Not yet. No,
but I think there are great plugins out there that are doing saturation modeling really well. None have fully gotten to the level that I feel the DW Fern tube gear that I have is at. There's something about it that's not only because when you say that tubes are compressing, yes, they technically are. They're saturating and there's some compression factor happening. But to me, it's like when I see a tube, like if you can, visualize a tube at the moment, as it starts glowing, the sound can expand and there's headroom in it, and it seems to blossom and bloom in a sense, right? So when I say even order harmonics, it's like that 200, that rich, that bottom, the cello frequencies are coming up and feeling really, really musical. And when I think about a transistor piece of gear, I think of all the signal getting squeezed into this little thing, and it's a visual thing for me. And it's like, okay, I know a vintage 1066 Neve sounds incredible. I had Tony's for 5 years; those sound incredible. But do you have $18,000 1066s, like one of a kind, that were taken out of a desk and put that's the Neve we're talking about? No, most people don't. They have the BAE remakes of these things that are mediocre to decent at best when it comes to the comparability to what you think that you're using, right? So when I bring up that 1176 conversation, you're not using the 1176 that you think that you're using. And I can go two ways with that. If you buy a non-URI, like a new 1176 Universal Audio, that is not the 1176 that one thinks. I mean, you might as well just put it under your desk and put your feet on it, or I don't even know what you should do with it. Not use it personally. But on the other side, in the plugin, you're getting these pieces of gear modeled, and from Universal Audio, which is Universal Audio is a great company. They've done a lot of things. The fact that you can track without latency through their console
I got a
software,
ton of their stuff. Yeah, great.
There's a lot of good that they're doing. But that 1176 that they're modeling was the reject from the studio that could be let out for months, because the ones that were being used, you can't let them go for 4 months while they're being modeled.
Interesting.
So the engineer, that's at least my perspective on it. So I've never heard a blackface 1176 sound like the one that I grew up using in this Long Island studio that had 4 Uris, right? Right. I know what that sounded like. I remember hearing it and understanding what it did to a snare drum, to a floor tom, to a guitar. I remember it. I've never heard it since, right? So
plugin wise, I know it's to indulge the people that ask questions. Yeah. What are a couple of saturation plugins that you like?
I love Neutron, Izotope's Ozone Exciter.
Yeah.
The warm mode is the closest to even order harmonic tubes that I've heard. I use it very regularly. Out of laziness, when I'm not lazy, I just send it through the Fern gear that I have, which has been the last probably 100 mixes that I've done this year. Almost every stem is sent through the tubes, so I'm not using it as much, but I was using it, and if I am like, I don't know, maybe not feeling something, I'll use that. The Ozone Exciter as well.
I like that one too. That's interesting.
Their triode mode is cool for upper mid-range stuff. I wouldn't use that in the low mids very much. Kind of gets a little murky down there.
Izotope, sponsor us.
I think they do.
Sponsor me.
I think Izotope is arguably the best plugin company at the moment. I think they're doing things on a wide scale, most people have this scale, not like I don't want to talk about every boutique company that I don't know and never heard of that might be doing some crazy shit. I love Good Hertz plugins. Yeah. I think Good Hertz is another great example to use. Like Good Hertz, the Wow and Flutter is fantastic. Tape modeling, like as a plugin, if you're going to do tape, I don't really like the way tape sounds. I really like the way that it modulates though with the Wow and Flutter in that one. Like you put the ATR UAD one on, that's not what an ATR sounds like. That Wow and Flutter control isn't right. It's just not. It's so visual. You think you're using an ATR tape machine, 1/4 inch. When you put that on, it's not. And if that's on your mix bus, it needs to be off. I'm sorry.
It's interesting how much, especially
sucks out all the life. It's not what tape did.
Yeah, there are definitely plugins that have fooled me based on how cool they look. Like, wow, that's a really good animation of a tape. It must be good.
I should also throw out a disclaimer. This is my perspective on these things. If you think that the ATR is making your records sound more like hits than it not being on, by all means, I would plead though to make sure, right? Let's talk about when and how to make moves in a mix process, and maybe not in a production sense, because in a production sense you're flying free, right? Let's have that archetype of the eccentric producer running around the room hitting a million keyboards and drum machines and like let it flow, let their engineer capture and chop. And
it's important to be distinct between those two processes, because so much of what I do is just like free creation. Let's put a crazy plugin and see what it sounds like. You're very much talking about the process of refining and taking it to a place where it is translatable, competitive, exciting in different exciting in different formats and in different speakers and in all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have I've basically quit. Wow, I just said clit.
Hey, it's on live.
I basically quit the former. I'm kind of completely doubling down on mixing. So,
and yet you still had a release a week ago.
I know. I mean, I got another one coming too. That was from 2 years ago. Amazing. like there are still production things happening. I don't really want to do very many of them.
You want to mix and cook.
Yeah, I want to mix and cook. Yeah. So, which are really similar, and I could talk about that too.
That'll be the next conversation.
But thinking about the refinement of someone's initial instinct idea is my forte. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'll make a move, and then I close the. I have a screensaver that's like obscure 1930s black and white films or something, like public domain weird ass movie. I have no idea what the movies are. One of them has aliens on a moon that's like only a planet filled with women and 3 men alien astronauts. Fun. It's like so weird. It's like that goes on the screen after every move, and I'm not exaggerating. Like if someone wanted to attend a mix session with me, it would be the most boring thing that they could exist in the time. Sitting on the couch, like I make a super small move. It could be a bold move, but it's super small in the grand scheme of things. Like I could reduce 15 dB and something. Like I'm not afraid to make those kind of moves, but I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to put the screensaver on, and I'm going to listen down, like almost through the verse, the chorus, maybe further, to make sure that move was good. Then I'm going to go back to Pro Tools. I also hate looking at Pro Tools, so this is a way to not romanticize Pro Tools anymore, like I did maybe when I was 17. So then I'm going to take that move off, and I'm going to listen again. And then I'm going to go do it again, right? So I'm checking myself to make sure that move felt good to me. Again, this is what feels good to me.
Yeah.
So you're checking yourself all the time.
It's an interesting thing. I don't know if the story is apocryphal or not, but the story with that Michael Jackson, when producing his records, if he would change a vocal part or a drum fill going into the third chorus, he would always want to listen to it from the top of the song.
Always,
because it's you're listening to it. It's fine to go like, wow, that snare drum's brighter. But if you're not listening to the big picture and getting perspective as much as possible, that's interesting. Maybe
I wrote a small paper for the Conversation crew, and I have it published on a newspaper kind of thing that I kind of want to offer a digital version of at some point. But it's on a fourth dimension of mixing music. We all know about width, height, and depth, and then I think about time, like a temporal approach to mixing. So by the time, like, I rarely get through the whole song until it's close to completion. And I note in that by the time I get through the whole song from start to finish, that's when I know that it's almost done. It finally sounds like a cohesive idea, right?
I'm that way with production too.
Yeah. Right. So I'm always going back to the beginning. I mean, I probably hear the song's beginning 1,000 times before I send the first pass. I've never counted. I could be exaggerating. It could be 200, but it's a lot. It's a lot of times because I'm always going back to that. If my trouble spot is the bridge, maybe I'll start at the second verse or the first chorus. Maybe not all the way at the beginning, but I'm never starting 2 bars before. That's not
context. Context is everything.
So, especially if you're working on something in a juicy area, like in the low end, right? And you're changing the producer's 808, for example, which is rare. You shouldn't change the producer's 808 very much. If you have to EQ an 808 too much, you're probably doing something wrong, or it's probably not a good producer. So there's and
it's not going to come back the way they're hearing it till you get to some of that sort of rough mix, board mix stuff with it. People are really used to things being a certain way, and you start changing it too much.
Too much, yeah. So, but you're working in that low end, that really juicy stuff. Make sure that you like that change by the end of the song, because you might get really excited about that 60 hertz boost, but then by the time you get to the third chorus, when there's 3 more synths and a guitar solo somewhere in the background, we don't know why it's there, but it's there, and that has some DC current in the low end that you forgot to filter, you're going to have to figure out why you're now clipping and distorting, and all of a sudden you're at -6 when your whole mix was at a good spot the whole time. Like these,
it's interesting. Do you remember the Pepsi challenge?
Oh wait, pause, because someone asked a question that I really want to address. Not sure if you take questions, but how much time do you spend mixing in mono? I want to just throw this. This is a huge question.
Go. We got 4 minutes left, so go.
zero time mixing in mono. All of the low end from my kick and snare and bass are in monos. I just wanted to answer that. I don't mix in mono. I don't want to mix in mono. It's not fun.
Wait. So but what? How much time do you spend mixing in mono?
Zero minutes.
But you're not doing things to kicks and 808s that make them stereo. Those are very focused, centered sounds. I don't know if that's. I can't really tell exactly what the question is.
Yeah, I think
because it says how much of your low end are in mono. How much of
I think that question is actually saying how much time do you spend checking your mix in mono. That's a pretty popular question that people get asked.
Interesting.
I don't.
The answer is none. Okay.
The answer is zero. I think most low end should exist in the center. So I think there's 4 rules to mixing, and that's it. Which is you should always have a bass, a kick drum, a snare drum, and a vocal in the center. Feel free to put stereo imaging on that as well, but no jazz panning.
Ooh, no jazz panning. I'm gonna go listen to some Beatles records, and Jeff Emmerich is gonna. Anyway, that's
Jorgen. Yes, you can have stereo Kaytranada style basses, but they also exist in the middle as well as stereo. Sorry,
we're gonna end with a controversial topic clearly like this. So maybe we address.
Wait, we can only do an hour.
I think it'll cut us off after an hour.
Really?
But let's leave them wanting more. I mean, at least leave me wanting more. There's like 7 other questions to address. Let's just do this again. It seems like people enjoyed it, and everybody out there watching who watch this in the next 24 hours, DM me, DM Jon. Let us know what you think. What's helpful. More specific questions. Maybe we'll do this again in a week or something like that. But man, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and this is actually super fun. I'm learning a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna go watch it.
We should be doing 3 hours. This is great. What do you mean?
What are we, Rogan?
3 hours.
Oh, and also, if people have thoughts, any of you guys who are in the production side of any of this kind of stuff for podcasts or whatever, if there's a better way to do this or a better format, obviously, I know you are working on a lot of stuff with conversations at the gift shop. But just if anybody's got thoughts, feedback, want to help, ask questions, any of that kind of stuff, this is an open forum and a community that we're trying to build. So hit us up.
Can't wait.
Love you, brother. I'll talk to you very soon.
Love you too. Bye.
Peace.